What is up, and welcome back to the Above the Fold series here on Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers, where I talk to people in the sports media industry who are breaking the mold. I'm your host, Brandon Silvers. Today, I am honored to be joined by a writer at Enjoy Basketball and host of Crease on Point on YouTube, Crina Mustafa. Crina, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I know. We haven't talked in so long.
I know it's only been like a week. Jeez.
I know, crazy. Almost long as the Wimbledon rain delays.
Right. Yeah. So if you aren't familiar with my stuff, Crina helped me out with the 2023 Wimbledon preview. So please go check that out. Before we get into everything you're doing today, we got to know, where did it start? Crina, when did you become like a sports fan?
Yeah, so as everybody, maybe they don't know, but my two sports are basketball and tennis. And I was introduced to basketball through the Toronto Raptors. I live in Toronto. I'm from Toronto, and my dad had taken me to my first Raptors game in 2011. So that was like the Jose Calderon era. Raptors were, not that great, but the games were fun. They were cheap to go to. We sat in the lower bowl all the time. And that was kind of the first time where I was like, the atmosphere in here is crazy. Like if you've been to a basketball game, you know how it is. It's as much as it's great watching on live TV, like there's something about in-person basketball games that is just different and totally hooked me into the sport. And then after that, I just started watching the Raptors, and I started watching more and more of the NBA and became an NBA fan. I was introduced to the W. It's funny because like in Canada, I think they did like a pretty bad job of promoting the WNBA because I didn't really know it existed until like kind of later in my life. I think one of my first memories of the W was I used to watch this show on the Disney Channel when I was a kid called Nikki, Ricky, Dicky, and Dawn. And they had Candace Parker come on the show as like herself. And like it was like 2009, 2010, like, or like in the early 2010s when she was still like pretty young into her career. And that was the first time where I was like, a women's basketball player. There's the WNBA. Like I didn't even know that existed. And then I really got into the W when Sabrina Ionescu got drafted because I have a Romanian background. Sabrina has a Romanian background, and that tends to be how I get into a lot of sports. If you guys remember when we talked about like Wimbledon and how I got into tennis in that episode last week. But yeah, I started paying attention when she got drafted first in 2020, and then I started covering the league in 2021. So that's kind of my journey in basketball, how I kind of got introduced. One was from my hometown, and one was just like the Romanian side. And then on the tennis side, kind of talked about it when we talked about the Wimbledon preview. I started watching Simona Halep because she was Romanian and I was Romanian. And that was also around the same time, maybe a little bit later as to when I started watching basketball. But it was just kind of like these really special players and really special teams that made me fall in love with each of the sports. And I just became really obsessed with them after that. And it's just kind of one of those things where you just watch the games all the time. You want to know as much as you can, go to as much as you can. And I guess like transitioning from being a fan to working in media was very last minute for me because although I was like watching broadcasters on TV my whole life thinking like, oh my God, they're so cool, especially all the women. I was like, that is so cool that is their job. I didn't really know that I could do it as a job until I was in my senior year of high school and we were applying to universities, and I just stumbled across a sport media program at a university in Toronto, and I was like, this is a thing. And I have never applied quicker for something as I did for that sport media program. And then I got accepted like maybe 2 weeks later, not even. And that was like the most excited I've ever been. So yeah, that's like my journey getting into sports.
Yeah, because I can't remember now, to be fair, I'm considerably older than you, but I can't remember ever seeing any college have a sports media program. And so the fact that that is available now is
Hmm.
awesome. Like I'm happy
Yeah, it's
that
fairly new. Like the program that I go to, like they only created it in like 2018 because what had happened was there was a bigger like media production program, which is more just like for TV and stuff like that. And then there were so many students that were interested in the sports part of the curriculum that they decided to just expand that and just make a sport media program. So like it's all very new. And I'm just like grateful that I'm like in that generation of like being able to do that.
yeah. And you were saying how you grew up watching these great women cover sports. Who were some of them who you looked up to when you were coming up and were like, man, what an awesome job she has?
Yeah, the first name that comes to mind is Kate Beirness. She does stuff for the Toronto Raptors. She's an incredible. She wanted to go into professional basketball, but I think she had like some injuries that kind of halted her career. So she went into broadcasting instead. She works for TSN here in Toronto, and she is probably one of the most talented broadcasters I have ever seen in my entire life. Her energy, her preparation, her knowledge. She's so good at hosting and also being an analyst, which I think is a very, very important like set of skills because she can pretty much mesh into any broadcast. She does stuff for the Raptors, but she also does a lot of like college basketball and other things. And she also works in like football as well. So I always respected her and admired her. I always like wondered like how she gets that broadcast voice because I would like to have that one day. I don't know if that's something that comes like naturally or you just practice that over time. But she's definitely one of the names that I was like always watching her on TV, I always wanted to be like Kate Beirness. And I know the day that I meet her, I will be like, I don't know, I'll try not to faint, but from what I've heard, she's like a really great person. Another name is like Mina Kimes. She's somebody that I have admired for a long time. I think her ability to get information across and be knowledgeable in the more like analytical parts of sports and things like that, while also bringing a sense of like humanity to covering sports. I think that's something that goes a little bit underrated where she's able to tell stories and she's able to treat the players like humans instead of thinking of them as like assets or just like numbers or anything like that. Her personality is amazing. Like you just enjoy watching her because you can tell that she's just being herself. And you can really tell when somebody is genuine. So she's definitely another person that I've looked up to for a long time. I used to watch her on ESPN. Used to have this show called Highly Questionable, in which
Yes.
she would come on a lot with Poppy and Dan, and I loved watching that show. I wish like ESPN still had like a lot of shows like that. I know it's like it's a weird place to be in the media right now. A lot of like personalities are getting cut, a lot of shows are getting cut. But just like fun shows like that where you can still talk about what's happening in sports, but having some fun with it. Like I always wanted to work on shows like that and just be a sports broadcaster in that way.
Dan Lebitard actually led me into this because he was kind of the first guy to show like, hey, you can cover sports in a way that's fun and show your personality. And also, like, he's Cuban. He'd have on Mina. He'd have on Bomani Jones, who's black. Like, he'd
Mm-hmm.
have on people who look like me and who kind of looked at sports the way that I do. And it was just awesome to just come watch that and see Poppy do his thing. See, oh no, every
Yes,
afternoon with the
exactly.
cards.
Oh man, I miss that show so much.
Oh, it killed me when they canceled that, and then obviously Dan's doing his own thing at Meadowlark. But no,
Yeah.
die hard, highly questionable fan here as well. Uh, so in Canada, they got TSN as the main. That's like the ESPN
Yes.
equivalent.
So there's two. There's TSN and there's Sportsnet. I think TSN is like some entity of ESPN, like the way that they have their partnership. And each of them have they're owned by two of the largest media companies in Canada. And each of them have like their own rights for so TSN and Sportsnet will like equally balance Raptors game throughout the season. TSN usually and they'll do the same thing with some WNBA games as well. I think they could improve on like how many W games they are broadcasting, but it's been okay so far. But yeah, and they have like TSN does a lot of the hockey stuff, and Sportsnet does a lot of like baseball. So those are the two main sports broadcasters. If you want to watch sports in Canada, that's usually where you tend to go.
And how are they in terms of having women personalities on their shows? Because I know you mentioned Mina, who is one of the few, my girlfriend actually commented on this last night, who gets the opportunity to actually be an analyst. Normally here in the US, the women are there as like the moderators on the first takes or whatever arguing show we have. So is it different in Canada or kind of the same?
I think it depends on the sport. Like for example, TSN's hockey coverage, I would say needs to be a lot better in terms of getting women on there because it is a lot of like middle-aged white men. And I'm not really a hockey fan, but whenever I see their hockey stuff, that's what I see. Or like when they do like NHL like trade deadline day, it's just like a whole panel of just men talking about stuff. But I'd say for basketball, they've done a pretty good job, especially Sportsnet too. They've started to incorporate, and I think Sportsnet hockey coverage also has more women, where they do incorporate a lot of more female analysts into their like broadcasts and things like that. I think basketball does pretty well with it because they have Kate Beirness. They actually bring on Kia Nurse during the Raptors season as an analyst. Like she's joined their broadcast team. She is really, really good. I'm really happy that they had brought her in full time now. So that's like another thing that's super cool for WNBA players who just like a small aside, like they don't have to go overseas to play basketball if they get like broadcasting gigs like this that they can do during the NBA season. I just think that's like really cool. And she's been an incredible addition to the TSN broadcast. They have like Kayla Gray, who's also another major female broadcaster and media personality that works for TSN. So I think, yeah, when it comes to basketball, I think that's probably the most diverse that we get in terms of these two companies. And I think that's also just a reflection of the sport itself. Basketball tends to feel more diverse. And when you have broadcasters and people that reflect that, who are covering the game, I think that it's like it reflects life. Like sports are a microcosm of society, and I definitely see that in basketball. I think some of the other sports may need to catch up a little bit. And I think also just like even in terms of the tennis side too, TSN has the tennis rights here for Grand Slams and for the 1000 events. But I would like to see more in terms of tennis coverage overall, and then also adding more women to the tennis coverage.
Are you seeing in your program in particular, like more women joining that, looking to have a career in sports media?
Yeah, so in the program, it used to be that there were way more men applying than women and getting in, I should say. But in the last couple of years, they removed some of the requirements that were putting women at a disadvantage to get into the program. And so now I'm seeing that there's much more like a 50-50 split. A lot of my close friends in my program at school are women, and I think they're all very passionate about what they want to do. They're very ambitious, very driven. And so I am seeing a lot of improvement on that end. It's also just sad. Like I'm like the only tennis fan in our program. I'll never forget. We had like a speaker come into one of our classes and they were like, is anybody here a tennis fan? And I was legit the only person that raised my hand. But you know, I think that like there's a lot of them are like hockey fans, and we have quite a few basketball fans, but I think it's still trending in the right direction of there are more women in the program, and hopefully that's going to translate to more women working in sports.
So you are still in the program. I mentioned I was considerably older than Crina, and I have very bad knees to show for it.
I have bad knees too, so you know it's all relative.
There we go. Perfect. I'm happy about that for some reason. So, but you already are everywhere from what I've seen. How have you been able to, while still in the school, get these opportunities and make the most out of them too?
So when I got into university, that was pretty much around the time right when the pandemic hit. My first year of university was in 2020, and it was completely online. And for a program that is supposed to be super hands-on, that felt super disappointing that we were doing online school, which I get. Obviously, there's a pandemic going on at the time, but it was around that time where I was like, okay, what else can I do since I'm not going to be able to go to my classes in person? Because I have to be able to build my experience within sports. And right now, school is not really completely going to cut it. So around that time, a couple of me and my friends who are in the program who are women, we started a website called Unbench Sports. And it was basically a website where female writers could just write whatever they wanted, cover the sports that they wanted. We even had like merch and a whole, like it became this whole thing because we found that like a lot of the men in the program had this experience and they did this in high school and they did all these things. And then a lot of the women were like, oh, we didn't really have the same opportunities, or we weren't able to do all these things. And so we kind of started that, and that was my first time actually doing something within sports. And that kind of just propelled to other writing opportunities in basketball and tennis. And then I literally have worked like probably a million jobs at this point. But I did a little bit of like I was an assistant for CBC Sports, which is also a major broadcaster here in Canada, but they focus more on like the other miscellaneous sports like volleyball and all like the global stuff, and more of the like there's more of a Canadian emphasis on it because it's like government funded. But I was an assistant with them for like a year and a half, just kind of learning the ins and outs of TV production and sports. And I worked like the Tokyo Olympics with them. And I just kind of tried to keep building on every opportunity. I tried to say yes to as many things as possible, just kind of get myself out there. And I just started doing all these little things, whether it was like writing or being an assistant, and kind of just building up a reputation and seeing like, okay, how much experience can I get working while I'm still doing school? And honestly, because it was online school, it wasn't that bad to manage because I didn't have to commute anywhere to go to classes. So I was able to balance all this stuff outside of school. And it was in October 2021, I believe, when I got a job with the Parlay, which was now known as Homestand Sports, to do digital content for them. And it started out as just like recording scripted videos about basketball and tennis and just what random they were doing sports betting content at the time. So I was just doing these like scripts. And then I started to do it more and more. And I was like, hold on a second. I really like doing on-air stuff. And it kind of just blossomed into me doing more on-air content and work. And then they finally got a studio, and I was with them up until June of this year. And so I think that just like opened up so many, like me being able to do all these small opportunities, I think just helped me grow my resume, grow my skills, and just kind of keep me moving forward, because I never like to feel like I was staying in the same place or that I was just doing school. Because honestly, like when I do graduate, I think the people who have shown that they have all this stuff on their resume is probably going to help them, rather than the people who just did the program in school and didn't really have any other experience to show for it. Especially in an industry where I think the work experience is the most thing. Like as much as I value my education, at the end of the day, it's your work experience that is going to get you a job and get you further in life. So that's kind of the mindset that I always had. But yeah, just trying to get as much as I can. It was hard because like this past year was the first year that I had a fully in-person school year. So my first 2 years were like 90% online. So it was a bit of people are always asking me, they're like, Crina, how do you juggle all this? I'm like, I don't know, to be honest. It was a lot, but it's all just learning experience. Just learning things like time management as well is really important. And I think now I'm getting to a point where I'm like, okay, I need to work on my work-life balance too. And I think I'm getting pretty good at that too, because you also don't want to get burnt out really quickly. I have to remind myself sometimes that I am still in school. So although I'm like trying to do all these things, sometimes I'm like, hold on, breathe, you're 20, you're okay.
And this is an industry too, where they will work you to death if you let them. I mean, Stephen A is Stephen A and well compensated for it, but that dude is everywhere. And now he's like one of three on-air personalities they have over at ESPN now too. So he's going to
Yeah.
be even more places. How easy was it for you to get used to doing the on-camera stuff? Was that something that came natural to you? Because I know I started audio only and then switching to doing something on camera. That was quite the adventure. Was that something that was just like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, or did you have to work at it?
It was definitely weird because up to that point, I had done a lot of writing and I thought that I was gonna go either the media route or just like something behind the scenes. And so when I started doing this like digital content for the parlay slash homestand sports, it was a bit of an adjustment too, especially when it came to WNBA content, because I think like you could probably agree with me, like the W is still in some aspects pretty traditional with they do want the traditional media journalists to be credentialed to cover whatever their league, things like that. And I think my first year of covering the W was through writing for a website, and going from that to creating video content was a bit of adjustment. It was also just like I'm trying to find myself in this industry too, trying to figure out what I want to do, because I am doing a lot of things, but I feel like I still don't really have a specific focus to narrow down. And I know I don't need to yet, but it is something that I did battle with as I was like kind of transitioning from, I still do writing content, but my main focus is video stuff now. I also tried a couple of like different roles at school, whether it was like sideline reporting, doing like color commentating to see what I like, what I don't like. And they were fun, so it didn't really help me narrow down anything. But
Now I
it's
have
more,
even more options.
yeah, exactly, which is not great for somebody who's not so good at making decisions like me. But no, it was good. I think I'm just trying to do everything. If I go back to look at like the first video I ever made for the parlay, I think I'd probably cringe. But I can definitely see my progression from the first video I made to the way that I conduct myself now. I definitely feel a lot more comfortable, which is one of the biggest things, because honestly, like growing up, I was super shy. Like I never really had the outgoing personality that a lot of like broadcasters seem to have. So I also wasn't sure if I was built for that, because I know you have to be like very loud, very, confident. And so that is something that I am continuously working on every single day. But I think honestly, just putting yourself out there, that's something that I'm also trying to do with my YouTube channel. I think just putting myself out there and trying to get as many reps as I can in will ultimately lead to me finding my spot in this industry.
Is there anything specifically outside of just working on creating more content that you do to help kind of break out of your shell and become more of that like broadcaster type, confident, bold person?
Yeah, so it's funny. For like 6.5 years of my life, I actually did karate. And like not a lot of people know this. But I did, and it was a big part of my life. And once I reached my black belt, I started teaching as well. And I think that was one of the first things. What's
This
that
is
face?
wild as hell. So Crina can just bust your ass. No wonder that would make me confident too. Okay, continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's funny. But no, so I started teaching as well once I reached my black belt. And that was the first thing that really broke me out of my shell, because I had to lead lots of classes, lots of people. I had to yell, I had to be firm, I had to be assertive. And after growing up shy, I think that was the time in my life where I really changed a lot. And I think that's when I did become more assertive. And I think honestly, that's like helped me with moving into this video stuff, where I feel like that's just built some values in me where I do have that level of being able to talk to people. Like I used to go on like live TV and feel so nervous, but with each rep that I do, I think I'm getting better at it. And I think that's really the goal. So yeah, I think just doing stuff like that, like even the live TV, now that I think about it, we have like some news stations in Toronto that will reach out to me whenever something happens, whether it's like basketball or tennis news related. So like I've gone on to talk about like Roger Federer's retirement, to talk about the WNBA game in Toronto, just things like that. They're quick news hits. They're like 5 minutes long maybe, but doing that, knowing that it's like on one of the biggest news channels in Toronto, it can be very intimidating. And I think with everyone that I do, that also helps me with my broadcasting skills, because now I have experience doing live TV. Even if it's very little, I think if I hadn't done those news hits, then maybe one day if I get like a major job working in live TV, then I might be like blindsided, like, oh, this is a lot. So just trying to like do little things that help me with speaking as well, because sometimes I feel like I'm not so good with the English. It's hard to get words out. But just doing these little things. I also really like just watching other broadcasters on TV and taking notes. So like somebody that I watch a lot is Malika Andrews, who hosts NBA Today, and she does a lot of NBA stuff at ESPN. I watch her all, and I make mental notes of what she's doing, how she's transitioning between segments, how she handles a panel of hosts talking to each other all at once, how she's able to communicate the hosting part, but also still giving a bit of her opinion as well, and just kind of the way that she holds and carries herself on television. So I think just your mindset has to be that you're always learning, you're always trying to absorb everything. And like, yeah, those are some of the things that I do when it comes to like trying to become more confident, because I also think that watching other people be confident can also help you, because you start to internalize all of that.
1,000%. And I only know English and I still struggle with it. So don't worry about that. You are also very good on social media and you've built quite a presence on there. When did you realize, okay, this is another great tool I can use? And then how did you go about building that up?
Yeah, social media is exhausting, but it's gotten me to where I am today, to be honest. I started out Twitter in 2018, I think. That was the first time I made a Twitter account. And it was literally just so I can keep up with sports news and stuff, because I would always find myself going on Twitter but then I was like, I might as well just make an account while I'm at it. And it just kind of became where I was just like interacting with other basketball people, just tweeting all the time. And then once I started to get into like my program at university and started to do all this writing stuff, I realized like, hey, like I can promote myself on there. And so that's what I started to do. I started to connect more with people and just promoting your work. It's like anybody in this industry will tell you just how hard it is to promote your work all the time. And I know like you must feel like you're annoying, but you have to do it because you never know who you're going to reach. And so I think like I've definitely seen the moments where my following has like grown quickly. Like whether when I started covering the W, that was like a big surge in my followers. When like I have a lot of like tennis audiences too as well, and like a lot of Raptors stuff. And I think it was just kind of knowing who my audience was and just connecting with people on a genuine level too, because like I just kind of mentioned before earlier, people can tell when you're being genuine and they can tell when you're not being genuine. So I think that's also one of the most important things on social media. Even though like you still like, I don't want to say you're like separated from the fans, but like you almost are in a way. But at the same time, you still need to be connected to the people who are watching your content, because then they're going to want to consume your content. They're going to want to share and things like that. But yeah, it can get pretty exhausting. But honestly, like I've learned that like you can take breaks and you will be fine. And just yeah, it's just like just take it easy, just have fun with it. Like actually one of the tennis jobs. So I work with Sportsnet actually every summer for the tennis tournament that is here in like Toronto and Montreal. I work as their live stats person. I started last year for the first time, and I'm going to be working again this year. I got that job because I was tweeting about tennis like 24 hours a day, and their producer found me on Twitter because I was always tweeting about tennis, and he DM'd me. He's like, hey, like you seem really like knowledgeable and passionate about tennis. We're always looking for like positions for this, like for the women's broadcast at the tennis tournament. Do you want to chat? And I was like, yes, I do. Like, of course I do. And it kind of just led to that. And that would not have happened without Twitter. So like, it's so kind of like, it's so wild to think about how important of a role social media does play in my job. And just like the connections that you do make with people. And that's why I think it's so important I was at so our university like hosts like a university fair like every fall in like September, October for people who are in high school to come check out the schools, the programs, and all that. And I was the representative for a sport media program. And I remember I had like high school kids coming up to me and asking me like, what advice do I have for them to do before they even get into the program? And I was like, make a Twitter account, make a social media account, and put yourself out there so that people can see what you're doing, because that's what I did. And it's become one of the most important things in my sports life, because it's not just about social media. Obviously, you have to do the work to back that up, but you still have to get yourself out there, and you do have to be annoying because it will pay off. So yeah, that's like, it's kind of crazy how big of a role Twitter plays in my life, but I'm also just like not stressed when Twitter is not working at this point anymore, because I feel like I've built myself up enough connections with people to be like, I'll be okay without the app. But it's also just like, what can you do at this point? I know there's like a million other social media apps that are trying to like be a duplicate of Twitter, and I just can't keep up at this point though.
There are way too many, and I can't keep up either. But that's probably my biggest struggle right now, because I am certainly someone who feels that, oh man, I don't want to be annoying and keep posting and promoting myself. Promoting myself is just terrible. Like there's a million things I'd rather do. And I see how great of a tool it is. I see you, I see Big Low, people who I look up to who are crushing it. And I'm like, you see how it works, but just trying to get over that hump and actually do it, especially as you mentioned, like it can be super exhausting. And it's like, man, this might not be the best for my mental health to just be here scrolling endlessly.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is like such a fantastic tool. So hopefully it sticks around. I know we had some issues this past weekend, and
It's
like
been
you,
working okay for me like the last couple of days. I don't know about you, but
yeah, it hadn't been too bad. And I didn't mind the break, honestly. I was like, okay, let's go ahead and back away and
yeah.
go outside, enjoy the weather.
hmm
Um, how do you set like healthy boundaries where you're like, okay, I don't want to be, I know Shams is always on his phone, always on Twitter, Woj too. I don't think those guys sleep. How do you set those boundaries where you're like, okay, I don't have to be on this app 24 hours a day?
Yeah, so the first thing that I do is I actually have all my notifications turned off for every social media app. The only notifications I have on are my DMs so that I can see when people message me. But in terms of like the actual app notifications, they are off. So I don't get any kind of ding, any kind of nothing on my phone. That's number one. I will see the notifications when I enter the app. That is my first boundary that I set. My mental health has been so much better since I did that. I highly recommend it. I know it's tough when you have like people like Shams and Woj like breaking news. But like what I do is, so I still have their tweet notifications on technically, but not to notify my phone. So like when I go in the app and like the notification bar has like whatever number on it, Shams and Woj, the notification will pop up within the app itself, and then I will check on their tweets. But like I don't need that kind of dinging on my phone when I'm just like out doing stuff. So that's number one. Notifications are off for every social media app except for DMs. Number two is just like, it's just kind of it just takes a little bit of self-control, honestly. Just like being able to be like, I'm gonna put this away and I'm just not gonna go on these apps, or not gonna go on my phone. I like to go on like walks a lot, like go outside a lot. Just spending time with like family and friends too. Like I know it sounds so like cheesy or simple, but it really is as simple as just putting your phone away, because it's very easy to get wrapped up into the online world and just be very online. And I found that can be draining. Like the people will be there, they will still be there when you come back. Like they're not going anywhere. So I think that's like one of my biggest things. I'll definitely just go on if I'm like live watching, like I'm watching games live and I just want to like tweet about the games, like I'll go on and do that. But yeah, honestly, it's just like, if you think in the mindset of my phone is not the default of my day or not the main part of my day, then I think it makes it a little bit easier to not be on the phone as much.
And how do you deal with negativity? Because it's super easy to be negative on social
Mm-hmm.
media. I had in not really an incident, but I had posted a TikTok that was a joke about Steph Curry ruining the All-Star game. And I had
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of like middle schoolers just in my comments.
They
And
are
I
the
felt bad once
worst.
I realized I was like, I'm arguing with kids at recess right now. Let me go step outside. But how do you deal with that? Because I'm sure, especially as a woman in sports who
Mm-hmm.
covers women's sports, I'm sure it's
Mm-hmm.
coming at you from all angles. So how do you deal with that? Does it really like affected you at all? Or
Well, firstly, your answer to those middle school kids should be go to recess, get on your
go,
phone.
go study
Um,
your pre-algebra. Go.
yes, exactly. But no, so when I hit 500 followers on Twitter, I turned my DMs off to people who I don't follow because the amount of DMs that I was getting and the negativity and the inappropriateness of the DMs was getting really crazy. And I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. So unless unless I follow you, you cannot DM me on Twitter. I have my email in my Twitter bio for any like business inquiries, and that usually eliminates all the dumb DMs because nobody wants to do that extra step and actually email you. And if they do, then you know it's like some really, really like random weirdo. But yeah, so like that's my biggest thing where my DMs are off for people that I don't follow. That's helped cut out a lot of the negativity and a lot of the sexism that comes towards me, like just being a woman in this space. Like I remember in my early days of Twitter, when Kawhi Leonard was on the Raptors and they like returned to San Antonio to play the Spurs, and he was getting booed on every possession of the ball, and it was just like super unnecessary at that point. And I remember putting out a tweet like when is this like Spurs crowd going to stop? Like we get it, like we got the message. And I was getting death threats in my mentions and DMs from like Spurs fans who were salty that I said that. And I was like, this is taking it way too far. I was literally like 16. I was like, this is crazy. So then that was kind of like the first time where I was like, what is going on in the Twitter
Yeah.
world, in the Twitter space? Like, is this really how like women get attacked? But yeah, I do still get like a lot of weird replies in my tweets sometimes, but I feel like I've gotten good at either just ignoring or blocking them. I know there's whole thing of like if you block them, then they win and they can like you give them whatever, like they can post a screenshot saying, haha, she blocked me, she's so soft. But like I don't really care about that. If I don't want you on my timeline and I don't want you under my tweets harassing me, I will block you. I'm totally cool with doing that. And I've had instances where even people in the media space or in the podcasting space, like repeatedly come after me for like days on end. And I'm just like, no, I'm blocking you. I don't even care what you think at this point. Like, this is just ridiculous. Like, literally, go outside, have recess. Like, go do something else with your time. Like, this is just, it's crazy because it's just like, this is an online world, but you're communicating with real humans. And I'm pretty sure that if we were speaking in real life, you would not speak to me like that. So it's just a matter of just like knowing how to set my boundaries. And I think I've gotten really better at that because I used to take a lot of it to heart and get really not emotional about it, but like just like upset about the things that I was getting in my mentions. And so it's definitely died down a lot. But like even in like last week, I had some like weirdo that was like replying to every one of my tweets with like some weird like staring meme. Like it was just like it was super weird stuff. So I ended up blocking them. But yeah, it still happens from time to time. I think it also helps when the community is full of women. Like I've had women like step in to like defend me or like have my back before, and I really like that. And also I would even urge like the men in the sports community to defend women too, because that's also one of the things I noticed. It's like who actually has your back, especially when it's not some random weirdo that's attacking you and it's somebody who's like in the media space that people know. That to me is one of my biggest pet peeves, where it's like, are you really going to let this slide? You're going to let people get away with this kind of behavior. It's very interesting to see who your allies actually are. But it is a learning process. And I think that I'm getting good at like not being too affected by it.
And speaking about like the inter industry stuff, as someone who is just like recently dipped their toe into like women's basketball Twitter and everything, and trying to learn that landscape and who is and isn't, I guess, problematic for back of
Hmm.
lack of a better term, and like, okay, we got to watch this person or maybe this publication or whoever,
Hmm.
and it's just like you wouldn't think that in like an industry covering women's sports specifically, but there's so much within like
It's
intersectionality
almost
and stuff
worse
that you need to.
sometimes.
It
Yeah.
is brutal. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'll be off Twitter and I'll hop on. I've missed something terrible that
Yeah.
happened. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to catch up on all this. So,
You're like, who's the main character today?
yep. So it is wild. And like as we said, there is plenty of negative about social media, but there's plenty positive, such as growing your personal brand, which seems very important because it used to be like I'm going to go work for the brand, whether it's like ESPN or Sports Illustrated. But as things have shifted, now personal brand is very important. And
Hmm.
you're doing that with Crease on Point as well. So, what made
Hmm.
you decide to take that leap?
Yeah, it's been an interesting time. I think I definitely was getting very wrapped up in the working for a brand, and kind of got a little bit away from myself, which is like part of the reason why I did end up leaving homestand recently, where I feel like I had just kind of lost touch with what I was doing a little bit and why I was doing it. And at some point you have to realize like these big corporations, they don't really care about you. And like I care about me and I care about the work that I'm doing. And so that was kind of like, so Crease on Point has been in the works for a couple of months now. And so I just wanted to get more control over what I was doing and kind of go back to my roots of like, what are the stories I want to tell and how do I want to tell them? And so like right now, like to me, like basketball and tennis, but specifically on the women's side too, is the biggest thing for me, especially the WNBA. That's like that's something that I've been working on the last several years of like, okay, how do I get better at telling these stories, at sharing these stories, at just spreading more awareness of the league and who the players are to as many people as possible, especially here in Canada where honestly like basketball doesn't always get the respect it deserves or support it deserves when it comes to coverage, especially on the women's side. And so I've just been kind of trying to figure out like, okay, how do I build my brand as being the person to come to when it comes to women's sports, specifically basketball and tennis, especially here in Canada. So that's something that I'm continuing to working on. Like I've done a little bit of that on my channel so far. I'm going to continue to try and do it, because I just think that people they want more coverage of women's sports and they want more coverage of sports in general. Like I've already gotten a couple of messages requesting me to do like certain videos on my channel of like the Canadian players in the WNBA, or and on the Canadian national team as well too. Like people are literally asking me, "Can you make a video on this?" And I was like,
That's
"I love
awesome.
this stuff." Yeah, like I really love that because firstly, it shows that you want to watch what I have to say, which is great. But two, like it's showing me the interest is there. And it's the interest is there. People will follow you where you go, not necessarily like the brand or the company. And I think it's up to us to increase that media coverage. Like so many, I would say like probably like 90% of WNBA reporters and writers and content creators that I know, it's not their full-time job, but they treat it like their full-time job. And they do a really good job of covering the league. And that just has gained so much of my respect. And I want to have the same mindset too, because like it's literally about the players. It's about the league. It's not necessarily about us. And so I think like once you make your personal brand growing the sports that you love, then that's the goal really.
What was it like as someone who's so passionate about the WNBA to see the support it got in the preseason game there?
Oh my God. Brandon, I cried during the player warm-ups because all the emotions just kind of hit me where I was like, this place is sold out for a neutral random preseason matchup in Toronto where we had never had a W game there before, obviously never had a team before. And just seeing like also in addition to the game, just the events that were happening that entire weekend, they really dedicated a whole weekend to meeting the players, doing all these like activation things in the city. It was the most like W merch I've seen on people like in downtown Toronto ever, because usually I'm like the only person like wearing my orange hoodie on the street, or like I see like maybe one other person, and I just kind of like stare at them and they probably think I'm like weird, but I'm like, oh my God, like they're wearing a WNBA hoodie or a shirt or whatever. So it was really cool to see. And I think especially, I know I'm biased because I'm in Toronto, and I know like the rest of Canada has feelings about how Toronto centric everything is, but I think because we have the Raptors here being the only NBA team, and in baseball too, I know there's a lot of like hockey teams in Canada, but I think specifically in baseball and basketball, people of Toronto understand what it means to only have one team, to only like to be so small almost in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the pro leagues. And I think they know how to appreciate and rally around a sport or a team or a person. And so I think when they brought the W to Toronto, they were like, this is more basketball in the city, because I think that basketball in the summer in Toronto is a fantastic idea in terms of like just the sport, the product, the marketing, like just everything behind it. It's a really good idea. And I think people just realize like this is another thing that we can put our support behind and treat it like almost like our baby in a way. Like that, I feel like that's literally how Toronto and Canada treats their one team in their one league. And so I think I expected it, but maybe not to this degree. So it was really like cool to see everybody turn out. Like I was seeing little like boys and girls like just like shouting the players' names and cheering for them like during the warm-ups. And it was so cool to watch, because after like so many times of people telling me, oh, there's no audience for women's sports, there's no audience for women's basketball, it's not there yet, it's not where it needs to be, or like it's not on us to grow their audience. Like I've had people in the media say that to me, which is like incredibly disappointing because I know the audience is there. And so I think that game was really great because it kind of just proved everybody wrong. Like, yeah, people are here, they want basketball in every single form. And yeah, I think it was really special. Even though it was just a preseason game, like just the history and the moment of the game was really, really important. And I definitely did not take it for granted. I would like the W to come to Toronto really, really badly.
Get on it, Kathy. Make it happen.
That's right.
And talking about the way that sports media views women's sports, it is either, to me, it seems to be not worth covering. I'll cover it as a stepping stone. It's an honor and privilege to cover it. As someone who looks at it the way you look at it, why is it a privilege for you to be able to cover women's sports?
I mean, I don't know, maybe part of it is because I am a woman and I feel like I can relate to them a lot in terms of just like the struggles of being a woman. But I also just really appreciate the sport. Like I think, and this is not like full disclosure, I have been an NBA fan way longer than I've been a WNBA fan. However, I think that the W is more interesting to watch than the NBA, just based on the style of basketball that they play. And I think that's why I'm so attached to it, is because I really think the sport that they play, the way that they play is so cool and so interesting. Like they have so many, the way that WNBA players score in such different and versatile ways, like you don't really get that all the time. You don't really get to see that in basketball. I think I know like the really like the age old sexist take is like lower the rim so they can dunk. But like how many of your favorite players can actually dunk in a way that is like super entertaining for you? Like, are you asking Steph Curry to dunk? No, you're not. Like he's not. He revolutionized the game of basketball through 3-point shooting. So like it's just like there's so many different ways to appreciate basketball. And I think the W has just given me that, where I just can appreciate it because of the way that they play. And I think that's definitely why I'm so attached to it. And just like, I don't know, like even when it came to like watching sports broadcasters growing up, like like no offense, but like it wasn't really the men that stuck with me. It was the women that were doing it because I could see myself in them. Like I know we've said that quote so many times, if you can see it, you can be it. But it's really true because I know from like just experiencing that. So I think that just makes it all the more special for me. And in tennis too, of course, I think, although tennis people like to say is like more equal, and I think in a lot of ways it is, but at the same time I still like being more into it as well. I can still see a lot of the disparities, especially when it comes to coverage, and honestly still when it comes to like prize money and things like that, it's not as equal as it would like to appear to be. But yeah, so I just think like, and after speaking to the players too, I think that's one of the biggest things too, actually. Sorry, not to go on a tangent, but
Go for it.
just the access, the difference in access between WNBA women's tennis and then NBA and like the ATP, for example. I've gotten more access speaking to the women's players and then to the NBA. And I just think it's a different kind of atmosphere. I think most of them open up a little bit more. You're able to be a little bit more creative. We're talking to them where, and a lot of the problem is like having more traditional older like media journalists in the room sometimes where they ask questions that are inappropriate or just like the what happened there, and then the player is like, well, did you watch? Because like what is this question? But I just think that they also recognize like the privilege that comes with being able to share their stories and being able to talk to media and things like that. I still think a lot of us could be better on so many different levels, but I do feel a difference with like the way that I've been able to speak to some W players and some WTA players compared to the answers that I see from NBA players all the time, where they're just like, well, you know, my teammate was open, so I just passed the ball to him and then he shot it. He's so hardworking. He's tough. We're gritty, like all of that stuff. Yeah, so that's like, that was such a long-winded answer, but I think there's just a lot of different qualities that have me more attached to like the women's side of sports. And like, I'm okay with admitting I'm biased, but I also just think that they are super special to watch and they deserve the same amount of attention and respect and support as the men do.
And like you admit your bias and you acknowledge that in the traditional white male covering sports, guess what? They're biased as well. Sometimes they're a little bit
It's
not
true,
quite as
yeah.
open as admitting it, but everyone comes with their bias, and that's why representation matters. And we need to have as many different people covering as many different things as possible.
Exactly. And even here, like even me sitting here as like a white woman, like I know that I cannot also always tell the stories of Black women the way that they can. And I recognize that like intersection and wow, can I speak today? This is the part where English is
This
not
is the
coming out
English.
well.
Okay.
Intersectionality is so important in both like the sports, but also the people covering it. And so, yeah, I just think there's so many different avenues and ways that we can all just get better collectively.
Agreed 1,000%. That's one reason why I do this. And I will say, I've only done 3 episodes of Above the Fold so far, but it's all been people who cover WNBA. So the W community, as we mentioned, like women's basketball on Twitter can get very interesting sometimes. It can be a lot of drama, but it's also so open and so many people willing to help and show up and do different things. Like it's really fantastic as someone who's relatively new. Like I've been a fan for a long time, but new in that media part of it. It's been amazing for me to experience.
Yeah, and honestly, like I would say I'm also pretty new to it too. Like this is my third season covering the league, and I think you just have to be in a constant state of learning because things change every year. You can't stay, oh, just because something went this way like last year or the year before, that doesn't mean things are going to fly the same way this year. And I think like if you have that mindset, then you'll continue to get better and everybody else will get better and the coverage will get better and then things will continue to grow.
Boom. Nailed it. Well, you got some Wimbledon to watch. So
If there's no rain delays.
If there's no rain delays, fingers crossed. Where can we find you? What's coming up on Crea's On Point? Anything you got to plug and promote? The floor is yours because now I know as well you are also a black belt. So
Don't worry. Don't worry too much about that part. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Crina MM, or if the app is not working, you can find me on Instagram at Crina Mustafa. I pretty much like whenever I do post stuff on like my YouTube channel, I'll tweet it out and then I'll also post on Instagram if that is more your shtick. So yeah, I have to do some like content planning for my YouTube channel, but I might delve into some interview stuff for the month of July. So we'll see about that.
Stay tuned, check it out, and subscribe. That's going to be in the show notes. And if you are listening or watching this and you want to be on, or you know someone who needs to be on, hit me up. That information will be in the show notes as well. Crina, I appreciate you joining me. This has been fantastic. You're welcome on anytime. And thanks again for the Wimbledon preview help as well. People were super receptive to that. They were like, okay, this girl knows her stuff.
Good. Tennis is here. Everybody should be watching tennis. That's my last remarks.
Perfect punctuation to a great interview. I am Brandon Silvers once again, and I will catch y'all next week.